The wind carried dust across the empty street, swirling around boots that had walked more miles than most men would dream of. Elias McGraw paused at the edge of the settlement, his sharp eyes measuring the town the way a hunter studies his quarry. Weathered buildings leaned against each other, their timber frames beaten by harsh Wyoming winters. The saloon's piano stumbled through a tune inside, laughter cutting through the smoky air. On the far end, a church bell hung silent, as though it had already given up on calling souls to salvation. Elias adjusted the rifle on his shoulder, his face hidden beneath a broad-brimmed hat, and stepped forward. Some men carried stories wherever they went, and others carried scars. Elias carried both. Rumor followed him, whispered in trailside camps or around poker tables, about the mountain man who had lived alone for near a decade, who could track elk across shale, who had no master but the wilderness itself. To some he was legend, to others nothing but a drifter with no place in civilized society. To Elias he was just a man who had seen too much and trusted too little. If you want to hear more stories like this one, make sure you subscribe now and never miss the next tale of the Old West. He came into town for salt, lead, and coffee beans, the trifecta of necessities that kept him alive in the Rockies. But before he reached the mercantile, his gaze caught something unusual. Near the livery, a wagon leaned awkwardly to one side. Its wheel shattered from the iron rim down to the spokes. Beside it stood a woman, holding the reins of a weary horse with one hand and bracing herself on a cane with the other. Her hair, streaked with the dust of the road, was pinned back hastily. Her face, though touched by time and hardship, carried a dignity that defied pity. Elias slowed. Most men would have walked past, pretending not to see. Frontier life left little room for charity, but the sight of her limp stirred something in him, a flicker of memory he thought he'd buried years ago, of a sister lost before her time, leaning on him the same way. "You got yourself in a bind," Elias said, his voice low and gravelly. The woman looked up, eyes cautious but steady. "Wheel snapped on the rut. Blacksmith says he's got no spare till next week. Can't leave the horse standing this way that long." Elias knelt by the wagon, running his calloused fingers over the broken wood. "A man can mend this if he's got the hands for it." Her lips tightened, as if weighing the cost of asking. "You're not from here?" "No, ma'am," Elias answered. "But I know how to make do." After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. Elias stripped off his gloves, cutting and shaping spare timber from the livery's pile, using his hunting knife more like a carpenter's chisel. Sweat traced down his temples as the sun dipped behind the mountains. The woman steadied the horse, watching in silence as the mountain man worked with a patience born of wilderness living. When at last the wheel was set, Elias stood, dusting off his hands. "That'll hold till you find a proper replacement." The woman gave a small, weary smile. "I owe you thanks, stranger, Clara Dawson." "Elias," he replied simply. Her gaze lingered, searching his weather-beaten face. "Most men here wouldn't have stopped. You did." Elias tipped his hat, already turning to leave. "Just a wheel, ma'am, nothing more." Yet as he walked away, her words clung to him. Nothing more, she had said, but out here, small acts carried weight. Elias sensed this was not the end of their crossing paths, only the beginning of something that would pull him from the solitude he had sworn to keep. The saloon's music faltered, voices rising louder as night crept across the settlement. Elias pushed through the bat-wing doors, but in the back of his mind, the image of the limping widow remained, unshakable as the mountains themselves. Morning light spilled across the valley, painting the Dawson ranch in shades of gold and grey. The small homestead sat against rolling hills, its fences crooked, its barn leaning like a tired man after a long ride. Clara Dawson stepped out onto the porch, cane tapping against the warped wood, and surveyed the land that had both fed and punished her family for years. Her limp made every step deliberate, each one echoing the weight of battles fought silently. She had inherited this burden the day her husband was laid in the ground, leaving her with acres of stubborn earth, 2 sons barely grown, and debts that whispered louder than prayers. Yet she refused to abandon it. The ranch was more than land. It was memory, legacy, proof that their blood and sweat had mattered in a country that often swallowed dreams whole. Inside the house, the morning fire crackled weakly in the hearth. Clara moved slowly, grinding corn with her good arm, wincing at the ache that throbbed through her hip. The limp had grown worse since the winter storm that twisted her leg on the icy barn steps. Some days it felt like the bone itself resisted her will, but neighbors rarely saw her falter. Pride was a shield she wore with stubborn resolve, and she would rather collapse in the dark than show weakness in daylight. As she worked, her mind wandered back to the stranger from the day before, Elias McGraw. His name sounded as raw as the mountains he came from. He had appeared without warning, fixed her wheel with the precision of a man used to survival, and left without asking a thing in return. Clara wasn't naive. Kindness in the West often hid a cost, but something in his eyes unsettled her. They weren't the eyes of a man looking to take. They were the eyes of a man who had already lost more than he cared to say. The ranch demanded her focus, not her thoughts. The fences needed mending where winter winds had torn them down. The roof of the barn sagged with gaps wide enough to let in rain. Feed was running low, and without the strength to haul sacks the way her husband once did, Clara felt the pinch of helplessness with every task left undone. Still, she carried on. With her cane in one hand and determination in the other, she dragged herself from chore to chore as though stubbornness alone could keep the ranch alive. By midday, Clara had made her way to the corral where the cattle huddled near the trough. She leaned against the rail, breathing hard, the ache in her leg sharp and unforgiving. Sweat trickled down her temple, though the wind carried a chill. For a moment she let herself rest, eyes closing against the sun. "Ma!" a voice called in the distance, carrying urgency. It was Samuel, her younger boy, galloping in from the ridge. His hat flapped against his back, and his horse threw dust into the air. "Fences down on the north line, cattle are straying." Clara straightened, jaw tight. "Keep them close till Jacob gets back." "I'll come." Samuel frowned as he reined in. "You can't walk that far." Her cane struck the dirt with finality. "This land doesn't care for excuses. If I don't stand on it, it will forget me." The boy looked at her, torn between defiance and worry, then turned his horse and rode hard toward the breach. Clara followed as best she could, every step a battle. She knew the ranch tested her more each season. She also knew that one day her body might fail her for good. But surrender was not an option. The land had taken her husband, nearly taken her health, but it would not take her will. As the wind rattled the dry grass, Clara Dawson pressed forward, unaware that the stranger she had met in town would soon be drawn back into her life. And this time, his presence would not be fleeting. The sun was sinking low when Clara finally made her way back to the porch, her body aching from the long walk to the fence line. Dust clung to her skirts, and her cane felt heavier than iron. She had barely caught her breath when the distant rhythm of hooves reached her ears. Two riders emerged from the western trail, shadows lengthening behind them as they pressed their tired horses toward the ranch. Jacob Dawson rode first, tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders carrying the posture of a man older than his 20 years. His jaw was set firm, his eyes narrowed against the light, and there was a confidence to him that came not from years, but from stubborn will. Beside him, Samuel sat with less certainty. 17, wiry and quick-eyed, he held the reins loosely as though still adjusting to the weight of responsibility. "Ma," Jacob called, raising a hand in greeting. "We made it back from Casper. Got the cattle sold, just like you wanted." Relief washed across Clara's face, though she hid it quickly. "And the price?" Jacob swung down from his horse, dust rising as his boots hit the ground. "Fair enough. Not near what Pa would have fought for, but enough to keep us fed through winter." Samuel slid off his horse, his movements more hesitant. He cast a glance around the ranch, the sagging barn, the patched fences, the weary cattle, and his shoulders slumped slightly. "Doesn't look like the land's giving us any favors." Clara tightened her grip on the cane. "The land doesn't give favors. It only answers to work." Jacob stepped forward, laying a reassuring hand on her arm. "We'll manage, Ma. Always have." Yet his tone carried a weight beneath it, as though he knew the margin for survival was thinner than ever. The boys carried their saddlebags inside, the smell of trail dust and leather filling the small kitchen. Clara set out a simple supper, cornbread, beans, and coffee brewed strong enough to keep their eyes open. Around the table, Silence lingered, broken only by the scrape of spoons and the creak of chairs. Finally, Samuel glanced toward the door. Who was here? I saw wagon tracks fresh near the livery. Clara hesitated. A man passed through town, helped mend the wagon, nothing more. Jacob's brow furrowed. A stranger? His voice held the sharp edge of suspicion. He gave his name. Elias McGraw, Clara answered softly. The name drew a flicker of recognition from Samuel. Heard talk about him in Casper. Some say he's half wild, lived in the mountains so long he don't remember what a town looks like. Jacob leaned back, arms folded across his chest. Men like that don't just stop to help a woman with a wheel. What's he after? Clara met her son's eyes, her own steady. Not every man's kindness is a scheme. He asked for nothing. But Jacob wasn't satisfied. The frontier had taught him that every act carried a price, and strangers rarely lingered without reason. Samuel, on the other hand, seemed more curious than mistrustful, as though the mention of the mountain man stirred a quiet admiration. The evening wore on, shadows deepening against the walls. After supper, Jacob went out to check the stock while Samuel lingered at the table, fiddling with his empty cup. Clara watched him, sensing a question he wasn't yet willing to ask. Later, when Jacob returned, the two brothers exchanged a look, a silent agreement passing between them. Once Clara had retired to her room, the boys stepped outside into the cool night air. Stars stretched endless above the prairie, sharp against the black sky. Jacob spoke first, his voice low. "That man, Elias, we need to talk to him." Samuel nodded slowly, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "Ma won't like it." "She don't have to know." "Not yet," Jacob replied. "There's more to this than fixing wheels. We've got trouble coming, and he might be the only one who can help." The younger boy swallowed hard, glancing back toward the dim glow of the house. "Then we'd better make sure we're right about him, because if we're wrong—" Jacob's jaw tightened, his gaze locked on the horizon. "If we're wrong, we'll pay the price ourselves." The night was still when Jacob and Samuel found Elias at the edge of town. He was sitting alone near the livery, sharpening his knife beneath the faint glow of a lantern. The rasp of steel against stone was steady, almost soothing, yet it carried a weight that made the boys hesitate. Elias looked up before either spoke, his sharp eyes cutting through the shadows. "You two ought to be in your beds," he said, voice calm but edged with suspicion. Jacob squared his shoulders. "We need a word." Elias studied them in silence, then gestured to the empty bench beside him. "If you've come all this way, speak it plain." The brothers exchanged a glance. Samuel's nerves were plain, but Jacob leaned forward, jaw tight. "We know who you are. Folks say you've lived off the mountains near 10 years, say you can track a deer across shale and outshoot any man in Wyoming." "Folks say a lot," Elias muttered, setting his knife aside. "What is it you're after?" Samuel's voice was quieter, tinged with unease. "It's about our ranch." "About our ma." Elias leaned back, crossing his arms. "Go on." Jacob didn't waste words. "There's a man in these parts. Silas Turner. Owns more land than he can ride across in a week. He's been pressing us, saying we ought to sell what's ours. Claims it'd be better under his hand than ours. Truth is, he doesn't want the land, he wants control. Sheriff won't stand against him, and most men in town already bend knee." Elias's expression didn't change, but his silence pushed Jacob to continue. "He sent men to ride our fences, spook our cattle. He'll keep on till we're forced out. We can't let that happen. This land's all we've got left of Pa." Samuel's hands twisted together in his lap. "We're not ready, though. We can shoot a little, ride decent enough, but that won't be enough if Turner brings trouble. We need someone to show us how to stand, how to fight if it comes to it." The words hung in the air, bold and heavy. Elias studied them with a long, unreadable gaze. Finally he spoke. "And you think that someone is me?" Jacob nodded without hesitation. "You've lived where weakness means death. You've survived what most men can't imagine. If anyone can teach us, it's you." Elias's jaw tightened. Memories clawed their way back. Nights of hunger, the sting of snow against bare skin, the echo of screams he'd buried deep in the wilderness. Teaching meant dragging those ghosts into the open. He had walked away from such burdens for a reason. "Boys," he said slowly, "you don't know what you're asking. To fight a man like Turner, you don't just need rifles and grit. You need to carry the weight of knowing when blood is worth spilling and when it ain't. Once you take that step, there's no turning back." Samuel's eyes lowered, fear flickering across his young face, but Jacob leaned forward, refusing to yield. "We already took that step the day Turner came knocking. We just haven't got the means to stand firm. You can give us that." Elias felt the fire of Jacob's determination, sharp and reckless as a colt unbroken. He saw Samuel's doubt too, fragile yet honest. And then he thought of Clara, the limp that slowed her, the way she had clutched her cane like a weapon against despair. The widow didn't know of this meeting, but she was at the heart of it all. He rubbed a hand across his beard, sighing deep. "If I take this on, you'll follow every word I say. No boasting, no foolish pride, no running half-cocked. You break those rules, you'll get yourselves killed. Or worse, get your ma left alone again." Jacob's eyes burned with resolve. "We'll do it." Samuel hesitated, then nodded, voice barely above a whisper. "We'll do it." Elias gathered his knife, sliding it back into its sheath. "Then be at the ranch come morning. If we're going to make men out of you, the work starts at first light." The brothers stood, their silhouettes outlined against the pale moon. They had come seeking a savior, but what they had gained was something different. A reluctant teacher whose past was as rough as the land itself. Whether it would save them, or cost them more than they could pay, was a truth yet to be revealed. Dawn broke over the valley in streaks of rose and amber, the chill of night still clinging to the grass. Elias McGraw stood near the corral, arms folded, watching the two young men approach. Jacob strode with shoulders squared, eyes sharp with determination. Samuel followed, slower, his step uncertain, his face carrying the weight of doubt. "You're late," Elias said flatly. Jacob frowned. "Sun's barely up." Elias's gaze hardened. "In the mountains, late means dead. First rule, time belongs to the land, not to you. Learn it." Samuel glanced at Jacob, who pressed his lips together but said nothing. Elias handed each of them a length of rope. "Before you dream of rifles, you learn control. Tie a knot, strong enough to hold a horse, quick enough to free a man." Jacob scoffed, turning the rope in his hands. "That's child's work." Elias leaned close, his voice like gravel. "Say that again when you're tied to a tree in a storm with wolves closing in. You'll learn every small thing matters." The hours dragged with hard lessons. Elias made them haul water from the creek, stack wood until their arms shook, and run drills with ropes until their fingers blistered. By midday, sweat plastered their shirts and dust clung to their hair. Samuel collapsed against the fence, chest heaving. "You're killing us." Elias squatted in front of him, eyes sharp. "No, boy. I'm showing you the cost of standing tall. You want to face Silas Turner? Then you stand when your lungs burn, when your legs give out, when your fear tells you to quit. Because Turner won't stop when you're tired." Jacob wiped his brow, glaring with frustration. "This ain't fighting. It's chores dressed up as lessons." Elias's voice stayed calm, but there was steel beneath it. "A man who can't master his body can't master a rifle. You want quick victories, go find a gambler. You want to survive, you'll do it my way." Clara had come outside during the morning, leaning against her cane as she watched from the porch. She said nothing, but her eyes followed every movement. When Jacob snapped under the weight of another command, she spoke at last. "Your father once said the land doesn't bow to anger. Elias is right. Patience is the only thing stronger than muscle out here." Jacob turned to her, frustration burning. "And patience won't stop Turner from burning us out." Clara's voice was steady, but her hand tightened on the cane. "Reckless fire only feeds the wind. Learn what you're being taught, or you'll find yourself ash in that same wind." The silence that followed was heavy. Jacob dropped his gaze, biting back words he wanted to hurl, and returned to the rope drills. Samuel, though weary, seemed to absorb the lesson more quietly. He mimicked Elias's knots, fumbling at first, then finding the rhythm. By late afternoon, Elias finally put rifles in their hands. The weight of the weapons sobered both boys. He made them aim at fence posts, but not shoot. A gun is more than a trigger. It's patience, breath, and judgment. You fire without those, you're no better than a fool with fireworks. Jacob lifted his rifle, shoulders tense, eyes narrowing at the target. Samuel tried to steady his breathing, his hands trembling slightly. Elias corrected their stances with quiet commands, each adjustment delivered with the certainty of a man who had lived long enough to know mistakes cost flesh. When the sun dipped, Elias called it enough. The boys staggered inside, too tired to argue. Clara lingered on the porch, her gaze fixed on Elias. "You've taken on more than you planned," she said softly. Elias shrugged. "Maybe. But if they're going to carry your name, they'd better learn how to keep it standing." Her eyes softened, gratitude hidden beneath layers of caution. "They'll fight you, just as they fight the world, but don't give up on them." Elias tipped his hat, turning toward the horizon. "Not planning to. But the mountain don't bend easy, and neither do I." The day had begun with reluctance, yet as dusk settled over the ranch, the mountain man found himself bound to a family whose fight was quickly becoming his own. The next days brought no rest. Dawn came with frost on the ground and a biting wind from the north. Elias drove the brothers into the pasture before breakfast, his voice carrying across the cold air like the crack of a whip. "Land don't care if you're sore. It only asks if you can endure. Answer it, or it'll bury you." Jacob groaned as he hoisted fence posts across his shoulders. His pride still burned from Elias's sharp tongue, but he refused to show weakness. Samuel stumbled under his load, his arms trembling, his breath visible in sharp bursts. Elias walked behind them, calm, steady, eyes missing nothing. By mid-morning, they reached the northern edge of the ranch, where tracks of wolves crisscrossed the frost. Elias crouched, brushing his hand over the prints. "They're testing your herd. Hungry beasts are worse than hired guns. They don't scare easy." Samuel's eyes widened. "What do we do if they come?" "You make them regret it," Elias said. He scanned the fence, where fresh cuts in the wire told another story. "But not all your trouble walks on four legs." Jacob cursed under his breath. "Turner's men." The wire was sliced clean, posts kicked loose. It wasn't the work of animals. Elias studied the damage in silence, then turned to the boys. "This is how men like Turner fight, not with open hands, but with shadows. He wants you to bleed out slow, till you quit." Jacob slammed his fist against the post. "We won't quit." "Then you'll need more than anger," Elias replied. He had them mend the line, showing Samuel how to pull the wire tight, guiding Jacob's strength into precision instead of fury. The work was slow, the cold numbing their fingers, but by the time the sun stood overhead, the fence held firm again. That afternoon, Clara brought bread and coffee to the pasture. She moved with effort, leaning hard on her cane, yet her presence lit a fire in her sons. She watched as Samuel struggled with a knot, and Elias corrected his grip. "You've got your father's hands," she said quietly. Samuel looked at her, doubt clouding his face. "Pa's hands were strong. Mine shake." Clara reached out, brushing his knuckles with her own weathered fingers. "Strength isn't in the stillness. It's in the will to try again when you fail." Elias said nothing, but the faintest nod passed between him and Clara, an unspoken agreement that the boy carried more than he believed. The ranch's trials didn't end with fences. That evening, as the herd clustered near the creek, the wolves came. Their howls cut across the plain, sending a chill deeper than the night air. The cattle stirred, hooves thundering against the earth. Elias grabbed his rifle, steady and calm. "Hold your ground," he ordered. Jacob lifted his weapon too quickly, firing into the dark. The shot cracked loud, scattering the herd in panic. "Damn it, boy," Elias barked. "You don't waste powder on shadows." Samuel's hands shook as a grey shape darted from the brush. Elias fired once, clean and sure, dropping the lead wolf before it reached the cattle. The rest scattered back into the night, their cries fading into the hills. Breathless, Jacob lowered his rifle, shame burning across his face. Samuel clutched his own tighter, though he hadn't pulled the trigger at all. Elias turned on them, voice firm but not cruel. Fear makes fools of men. You can't fight what you don't see. Learn patience or you'll feed the land instead of defending it. The brothers said nothing, their silence heavy with the weight of failure. Clara, watching from the corral, felt her heart twist with both fear and pride. Her sons were being tested in ways she had prayed they'd never need to be, yet she knew these trials were forging something stronger in them. As the night settled and the herd calmed, Elias stood at the fence, his gaze fixed on the horizon. This was only a warning, he said quietly, both from the wild and from men who'd see you broken. Harder days are coming. The firelight in his eyes left no room for doubt. The trials had only begun. The wind carried the smell of dust and tobacco as Elias tied his horse outside the saloon. He had come for supplies, but word in town traveled faster than stagecoaches, and already whispers followed him through the streets. The mountain man training the Dawson boys, men muttered it at the barber's chair, behind poker tables, even in the sheriff's office. Turner's name floated with it like smoke, thick and choking. Inside the saloon was a haze of cigar smoke and spilled whiskey. Laughter rose from a corner card game, boots clattered against the floorboards, and the out-of-tune piano struggled to keep pace with drunken voices. Elias moved through it all with the silence of a wolf in tall grass. At the bar, Silas Turner sat with one leg stretched out, his boots polished black, his vest neat despite the dust of the plains. He was a man who carried wealth like armor, his smile too sharp, his eyes too cold. Two of his hired hands leaned nearby, rough men with the easy confidence of those who knew their strength was paid for. Turner spotted Elias and raised his glass in mock salute. "Well, if it isn't the hermit come down from the mountain, I thought you lived on pine needles and solitude, McGraw." "What brings you to civilization?" Elias ordered a coffee from the barkeep, his voice calm. "Civilization's a generous word for this place." Laughter rippled through the room, but Turner's smile thinned. "I hear you've been keeping company with the widow Dawson. Noble work, patching wheels and chasing wolves. But a man ought to mind whose side he's standing on." Elias turned, meeting Turner's gaze without flinching. "Side I'm on is my own. But I've seen your kind before. Men who think land's theirs just because they've got more coin than spine." The saloon went quiet, the weight of the words sinking heavy. One of Turner's men shifted, his hand brushing the butt of his revolver. Turner, however, only leaned back, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "You've got a sharp tongue for someone with no stake in this valley," Turner said. "You're nothing but a drifter, McGraw. When winter comes, you'll vanish back into the mountains, and no one will remember your name. But me? My money builds this town, my men keep it standing. Even the sheriff knows which side of the river carries the deeper pockets." Elias sipped his coffee, the bitterness grounding him. "Sheriff who serves silver over justice ain't worth the badge he pins, and men who hide behind others to fight their battles aren't worth the boots they polish." A murmur swept through the saloon, some smirks, some nervous glances. Turner's smile cracked, and his eyes hardened like flint. He leaned forward, voice low enough that only Elias and the nearest men could hear. "You don't know the game you're playing, mountain man. I don't break men with bullets. I break them slow, through their stock, their land, their kin. Keep standing with that widow and you'll learn just how far I reach." Elias held his gaze steady. "You think fear keeps men loyal, but fear fades. When they see a better way, they'll leave you standing alone." Turner chuckled darkly, finishing his drink in one swallow. "Then let's see how long you last teaching those farm boys to play hero. The land has a way of chewing up pride." He rose, tossing coins onto the bar, and strode out with his men. The saloon buzz slowly returned, though the tension lingered like smoke. Elias remained at the bar, his jaw tight, his thoughts heavy. He hadn't sought this fight, but it was clear now. Turner had no intention of letting go. The widow's struggle had become his own, and with each step forward, the ground beneath them grew more dangerous. The days after the saloon clash weighed heavy on the Dawson ranch. Elias's warning had sunk deep into Clara's mind, though she kept her silence. The boys, however, carried the tension differently. Jacob grew restless, his pride stoked by the thought of Turner mocking their family. Samuel grew quieter, his eyes shadowed with worry. One evening, While Elias repaired a saddle in the barn, Samuel rushed in, breathless. "Jacob's gone," took Pa's old rifle and rode toward town. Elias dropped the leather strap, his jaw tightening. "When?" "Just after supper. He said he wouldn't sit waiting while Turner made fools of us." Elias cursed under his breath, snatching his hat. "Stay here." "Don't tell your ma." The ride into town was hard and fast, dust kicking beneath Elias's horse. He found Jacob near the edge of the saloon, the boys squared against 3 of Turner's men. Their laughter echoed down the street, sharp and cruel. Jacob stood with the rifle raised, his chest heaving, his pride louder than his sense. "Step aside," one of the men sneered. "Don't want to spill a boy's blood over words." "I ain't a boy," Jacob snapped. "I'll prove it right now." Elias's voice cut across the street like thunder. "Drop it, Jacob." Jacob's head whipped around, his face red with defiance. "He's mocking us, Elias. Every day they tear at our land and you'd have us do nothing." Elias strode forward, his presence enough to make the hired guns stiffen. "A man who fights with rage fights blind, and blind men don't live long." Jacob's knuckles whitened on the rifle. "I'm not scared of them." Elias stepped closer, lowering his voice until only Jacob could hear. "Then be scared of yourself, because right now, you're the one who'll bury your ma if you don't listen." For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them. Then Jacob's hands faltered, and the rifle lowered. Turner's men exchanged mocking laughs but didn't push further, retreating into the saloon. Jacob's pride stung deeper than any blow. Elias took the rifle from his hands, his tone sharp. "You think courage is pulling a trigger, it's not. Courage is knowing when to hold your fire and when to use your head. You'd have been dead before you even fired, and your ma would have wept another grave into the earth." Jacob's jaw clenched, tears of anger burning his eyes. "I just wanted to show we're not weak." Elias's voice softened, though it carried iron beneath it. "Strength isn't in proving to them you're a man. It's in proving to yourself you can outlast them. That's what keeps land in your name, not dying with a rifle in your hand." The ride back was silent. Samuel met them at the gate, relief flashing in his eyes. Clara stood on the porch, her expression unreadable. She said nothing, though Elias caught the flicker of fear in her gaze when she saw Jacob's lowered head. That night Samuel lingered by the fire with Elias. His voice was quiet, unsure. "Jacob doesn't see it, but I do. You're not just teaching us to fight, you're teaching us to think." Elias glanced at him, surprised by the boy's clarity. "Your brother's fire can light a path or burn a house down. Your task is learning which it'll be." Samuel's lips pressed together, determination settling over his face. "I won't let Ma down, not the way Pa did, leaving debts behind. I'll do whatever it takes." Elias studied the boy, seeing in him not just fear but a seed of steadiness rare in men so young. He leaned back, the firelight catching the scars across his hands. "Then you'll have to learn faster than you'd like, because trouble's coming quicker than either of you knows." The night stretched quiet after that, but the air inside the Dawson house was heavy. Loyalty was being tested, not just to land or family, but to the lessons that would decide whether they survived the storm ahead. The house was quiet long after the boys had gone to bed. Elias lingered by the dying fire, the glow casting shadows against the walls. Clara stood nearby, her hand resting lightly on her cane, her gaze fixed on the flames. For a long while neither spoke. The weight of unspoken truths hung heavy in the room. At last, Clara broke the silence. "You think me strong, Elias, but you don't know the truth of it. My husband left more than land behind when he died. He left us bound to Turner." Elias looked up, his expression unreadable. "How bound?" Clara's voice faltered as she sank into the chair opposite him. "Years ago, when the drought near ruined us, my husband borrowed from Turner. Not money, but favors, grazing rights, cattle on loan, supplies when we had none. Turner never lets a man forget what he's owed. When my husband passed, the debt didn't vanish, it fell on me." Her fingers tightened on the cane, the wood creaking under the pressure. "I tried to settle it, Elias. Sold stock, worked through nights, begged for fair terms. But Turner's ledger grows longer with every season, and no matter how much I pay, he claims I owe more. He means to use that debt to take everything. Elias leaned forward, his eyes sharp. Why didn't you tell the boys? Clara's gaze flicked toward the closed bedroom door. Because they already carry too much. Jacob fights every shadow as if it's a war, and Samuel, he worries himself thin. I can't heap my shame on them too. They deserve at least a scrap of peace. Elias's jaw tightened. Peace built on lies don't last. They'll find out, and when they do, the ground will crack under them. Clara's eyes glistened, though no tears fell. I know, but I was trying to protect them, perhaps foolishly, perhaps selfishly. A mother's love makes strange choices. Elias studied her, seeing the battle etched across her face, the fight to keep her family whole while the weight of the past threatened to crush them. He recognized the same burden he once carried, the ghosts of choices made long ago that never stopped hunting. You can't shield them from what's already at their door, he said finally. Turner won't rest till he owns your land outright, and when the boys face him, better they know the truth than walk blind. Clara's shoulders sagged, exhaustion plain. Do you think they're ready to hear it? They'd better be, Elias answered, because soon enough, Turner will force your hand. And it's better they hear it from you than from his mouth. Silence stretched again, broken only by the pop of the firewood. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, carrying the lonely sound of coyotes across the plain. Clara listened, her grip loosening slightly on the cane. When I first saw you in town, she said softly, I thought you another drifter who'd pass through and leave nothing behind. But now I see you've bound yourself to us, whether you meant to or not. Elias's gaze drifted to the window, the dark horizon beyond. I've been running from people near all my life. Easier to fight storms than to fight men's needs. But some things don't let a man keep running. Their eyes met across the firelight, both burdened by pasts that refused to stay buried. For the first time in years, Clara felt the weight of her secret lesson, shared if not yet absolved. From the other room came the sound of Samuel turning in his sleep, a restless murmur. Clara's expression hardened. Tomorrow, she said firmly. I'll tell them tomorrow. Better they know now than live in false comfort. Elias gave a single nod. It'll hurt them, but truth always does. And sometimes pain is the only thing strong enough to make a man stand tall. The fire burned low, and the widow's secret settled heavy in the air. Tomorrow promised confrontation, not just with Turner, but with the truths that bound the Dawson family tighter than any chain. The morning after Clara's confession began like any other. Chores in the barn, the sound of cattle lowing in the pasture, the steady clang of buckets. But unease clung to the Dawson ranch like a storm brewing unseen. Elias moved with sharper eyes, scanning the horizon more than usual. The boys worked, though the air between them and their mother was heavy with the truth she had revealed over breakfast. Jacob had swallowed the news with anger, Samuel with quiet sorrow. Neither knew how to carry it yet. By late afternoon, the prairie wind shifted. A dry, restless gust swept down from the hills, bringing with it the faint, acrid smell of smoke. Elias stiffened instantly. He strode to the rise overlooking the grazing land and cursed under his breath. A dark plume coiled skyward from the northern fields. "Fire!" he shouted, his voice cutting like a rifle shot. The family rushed to the ridge. Flames licked across the dry grass, pushed by the merciless wind. Jacob's face drained of color. "That's Turner's doing. Don't matter whose hand struck the match," Elias barked. "It's here and we fight it now. Grab shovels, wet sacks, whatever you've got." The next hours became a blur of heat and chaos. Elias led the charge, showing the boys how to dig shallow trenches, beating at flames with soaked burlap. The fire roared like a living beast, devouring everything in its path. Smoke stung their eyes, burned their lungs, and turned day into a choking twilight. Samuel stumbled, coughing hard, his body shaking. Clara reached him, pulling him close despite the smoke burning her throat. "Stay with me, son. Breathe slow." Jacob fought like a man possessed, swinging his shovel into the earth, sweat streaming down his face. But rage made him reckless, charging too close to the flames. Elias yanked him back by the collar. "You can't outmuscle fire, boy. You work with the land, not against it." "I won't let it take everything," Jacob shouted, eyes wild. "You'll let it take you if you don't listen," Elias roared back. Neighbors began to arrive, drawn by the smoke. Men and women on horseback, carrying buckets and sacks, joined the Dawsons. With every pair of hands, the line held stronger. They fought shoulder to shoulder, stamping out embers, dousing sparks before they spread. As night fell, the flames weakened, beaten down by grit and sweat. At last, only smouldering patches remained, glowing red against the dark prairie. Exhausted, the settlers collapsed onto the blackened earth, their faces streaked with soot. Clara stood with her cane planted in the scorched soil, her body trembling from exhaustion, but her eyes blazing with defiance. "Turner can burn our fields, but he won't burn our will, not while I draw breath." Her words carried, settling into the hearts of her neighbors. A murmur of agreement rose, low at first, then louder. They had seen what the widow and her family endured, and in the firelight their sympathy began to harden into loyalty. Elias looked around at the weary faces, the singed land, the bruised but unbroken family. This wasn't just a ranch's fight anymore. The fire had done more than scorch the prairie. It had lit a spark in the people themselves. Jacob slumped to the ground, burying his face in his hands. "We can't keep living like this. He'll never stop." Elias laid a hand on his shoulder, steady but firm. "That blaze out there, it was meant to break you. Instead, it showed you can endure. Remember that. Turner don't know it yet, but his hold is starting to crack." Samuel, still catching his breath, looked out at the charred horizon. "Then we'll have to be ready for when he strikes again." Elias nodded, the fire's reflection burning in his eyes. "And strike again. He will." The prairie still smoldered days after the fire, the blackened earth a reminder of how close they had come to ruin. Clara walked the perimeter with her cane, her limp more pronounced, yet her spirit unbroken. Jacob and Samuel repaired fences in silence, their bodies sore, their minds heavier than the charred ground beneath their boots. Elias kept watch from the ridge, his rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes scanning both horizon and family. That night, as the house settled into uneasy quiet, Samuel couldn't sleep. Restless, he slipped into the small storage room at the back of the house, searching through an old trunk that had belonged to his father. Dust clung to his hands as he lifted the lid. Inside were worn boots, a frayed hat, and beneath them a bundle of letters bound with twine. His heart pounded as he pulled them out. The letters told a story Samuel wasn't ready to hear. Promises written in his father's bold hand, debts acknowledged to Silas Turner, not just for cattle and supplies, but for favors unspoken. Each page carried the shadow of compromise, choices made in desperation. Samuel's chest tightened as he read the words. His father had bartered their future long before Turner set his eyes on the land. When morning came, Samuel sat on the porch with the letters clutched in his hands. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. Jacob approached, wiping sweat from his brow after hauling water. "What's eating at you?" Samuel shoved the letters into his brother's chest. "Read them." Jacob frowned, scanning the pages. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, then hardened into rage. He knew. Pa knew what Turner was, and he still tied us to him. Samuel's voice cracked. "All this time I thought he was a man of honor, but he left us with chains we can't break." Jacob crushed the letters in his fist, his jaw trembling. "Then what are we fighting for? His mistakes, his pride?" Elias had approached silently, but his voice broke the air with calm authority. "You're not fighting for your father's choices, you're fighting for your own." Jacob turned, anger flashing. "You don't understand. He betrayed us before he even died." Elias met his fury without flinching. "I understand more than you think. A man's sins don't vanish with his last breath. They live on in those he leaves behind. But that doesn't mean you're bound to repeat them." Samuel's voice was softer, filled with hurt. "Then why does it feel like his shadow is still steering us?" Elias crouched beside him, his tone heavy with experience. "Because shadows only live if you keep them fed. You've got a choice now. Carry his burden like it's your own, or lay it down and build something better." Jacob shook his head. bitterness burning in his eyes. Laying it down won't stop Turner. He's got the law, the sheriff, half the town in his pocket. We'll always be his debtors. Elias's gaze sharpened. Not if you outlast him. Men like Turner believe power's forever. But nothing in this land is. Droughts break, winters pass, tyrants fall. What matters is whether you've got the will to see it through. The brothers fell silent, the weight of his words sinking deep. Clara had been listening from the doorway, her face lined with sorrow. She stepped forward, placing her hand on Jacob's arm. Your father made mistakes, yes. But don't let his failings blind you to what's still worth protecting. This land is ours, not because of him, but because of us. Jacob lowered his gaze, his rage cracking under the force of her steadiness. Samuel clutched the letters tighter, then fed them into the fire. The paper curled and blackened, the ink turning to ash. As the smoke rose, Elias watched the boys closely. The father's shadow still lingered, but the choice of how to walk forward now belonged to them. And soon they would need every ounce of resolve, for Turner would not wait long to test it. The town of Casper grew tense in the weeks after the fire. Conversations hushed when Turner's name was spoken, glances darted toward the Dawson ranch whenever wagons passed, and the air itself felt thick, as though the land braced for a storm that hadn't yet broken. Elias sensed it each time he rode into town for supplies, the way neighbors lingered between caution and courage, unsure which way to lean. At the general store, old Mr. Grady leaned across the counter, lowering his voice. You've stirred a hornet's nest, McGraw. Some folks admire what you're doing with Clara's boys. Others say you're just painting targets on their backs. Elias met his gaze evenly. Turner painted those targets long before I came along. All I'm doing is making sure the Dawsons don't fall easy. Grady sighed, handing over the sack of flour. Just know half this town's in Turner's pocket. He gives them steady wages, keeps their tables full. Hard to ask a man to bite the hand that feeds his children. Then maybe it's time they learn who's been feeding them scraps, Elias replied, tucking the supplies under his arm. Back at the ranch, Jacob trained harder than ever, his anger no longer directed at Elias, but at the man who had stolen their father's honor. He fired round after round at targets, his focus sharp, but his hands raw from recoil. Samuel practiced knots and tracking with Elias, his quiet determination growing steadier each day. Clara watched them both, her cane planted firm in the dirt, her eyes filled with pride and fear in equal measure. One evening, after the day's work was done, the family gathered around the table. The lamplight flickered across their faces, shadows deepening in the corners of the room. Clara broke the silence first. I spoke with Mrs. Allen today. She said Turner's been offering good money to anyone willing to ride against us. Neighbors, Elias, folks we've shared bread with. Jacob slammed his fist against the table. Cowards. They'd sell their own souls for a sack of coin. Samuel's voice was softer, though steady. Not cowards. Desperate. Turner knows how to twist hunger into loyalty. Elias nodded, his expression grave. Desperation makes men dangerous. It'll be harder to know who stands with you when the time comes. Clara gripped her cane tighter, her voice firm. Then we'll stand regardless. This ranch has taken everything from me. Blood, bone, years I'll never get back. But it won't take my will. If Turner thinks fear will break me, he's mistaken. Her words silenced the table. Even Jacob, whose anger often burned hotter than reason, lowered his gaze, chastened by her resolve. Later, Elias stepped outside, Samuel joining him. The sky was heavy with clouds, the prairie wind restless, carrying the smell of rain not yet fallen. Samuel spoke quietly. Do you think we'll win? Elias didn't answer right away. He looked toward the horizon, where the land stretched endless and unforgiving. This ain't about winning, boy, it's about outlasting. Turner wants to own your spirit as much as your land. If you don't give him that, you've already beaten him. Samuel absorbed the words, nodding slowly. Then I'll hold fast no matter what comes. The following day, word spread that Turner had called a meeting in town, summoning ranchers and townsfolk alike. Elias rode in alone to see what stirrings were taking place. He stood at the edge of the crowd outside the saloon. listening as Turner made promises of prosperity, painting the Dawsons as obstacles to growth, stubborn relics clinging to land that could serve the many. Murmurs rippled through the people. Some nodded, others frowned. The divide was plain. Elias returned to the ranch that evening, his face carved with stone. He gathered the family. The storm's closed now. Turner's tightening his grip. He'll strike soon, and he'll make sure the whole town's watching. The prairie wind howled against the windows as night fell, carrying with it the promise of conflict. The Dawson family, once only a widow and her sons, now stood at the center of a battle that would decide more than just their ranch. It would decide the soul of the valley itself. The morning broke with an uneasy stillness. Not even the birds dared sing. Clara stood on the porch, her cane firm beneath her hand, watching the horizon. Dust rose in the distance, a slow, deliberate cloud carried by riders. She knew without being told. Turner was coming. Elias stepped out from the barn, rifle slung over his shoulder. He met her eyes with calm certainty. "It's time." Jacob and Samuel joined them, both armed, their faces pale but resolute. Jacob's jaw was tight with anger. Samuel's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his grip on the rifle. Clara's heart ached to see them so young and already standing on the edge of a fight, but pride steadied her voice. "Whatever comes, we face it together." The riders arrived in force, Turner at the front, his fine clothes untouched by dust, flanked by hired guns, hardened by greed and whiskey. Their horses snorted, restless with the weight of the tension. Turner dismounted slowly, his polished boots crunching against the dry earth. "Clara Dawson," he called, his voice smooth, carrying false courtesy. "I've come to give you one last chance to do the right thing. Sell me this land, walk away with dignity, and spare your boys a future they ain't built to handle." Clara lifted her chin. "This land isn't for sale, Turner. Not to you, not to anyone. It was carved by our sweat, paid for by my husband's life, and it'll remain in Dawson hands." A murmur spread among Turner's men, but their employer only smiled coldly. "Stubbornness makes widows poorer, Clara. Don't let it make your sons orphans too." Elias stepped forward, planting himself firmly between Turner and the family. "Enough talk. You've had your say. Now you can leave." Turner's gaze flicked to Elias, contempt sharp in his eyes. "You're just a drifter with no stake here. Why throw your lot in with a family bound to lose?" Elias's voice was steady, steel beneath gravel. "Because I've seen men like you before, always thinking coin buys the world, but it doesn't. It just buys you fear, and fear don't last." Turner's smirk faltered, replaced with a flash of anger. He signaled his men with a tilt of his head. Guns were drawn, the metallic clicks breaking the stillness like cracks of thunder. Jacob raised his rifle instantly, fire in his eyes. Samuel swallowed hard, his breath shaking. Elias lifted a hand. "Hold steady," he ordered. His calm command cut through the chaos, grounding the boys. "They want you to shoot first, don't give them that." The standoff stretched, every heartbeat a drumbeat of tension. Turner stepped forward, his words dripping poison. "This ends today, McGraw. Either they give me the land or I'll take it over their graves." Clara's cane struck the porch wood sharply. "You'll take nothing from us, Turner." "Not now, not ever." Turner's face hardened, his mask of civility slipping away. He raised his hand to unleash his men, but Elias was faster. "Now!" he barked, and the Dawsons moved as they had been taught. Jacob dropped low behind a trough, rifle trained on the flanking riders. Samuel darted to the corral, steadying his breath just as Elias had drilled into him. Elias himself stood tall, calm and deliberate, his rifle steady as stone. The first shots rang out, dust exploding from fence posts, the air filling with smoke and fury. Jacob fired, striking the ground near a rider's boots, forcing the man back. Samuel, trembling but determined, hit his mark on a wagon wheel, sending another attacker sprawling. Elias's shot was precise, shattering the pistol from a gunman's hand without spilling blood. The ranch had become a battlefield, but not one of chaos. Every move bore Elias's training, every choice measured. They weren't fighting with blind rage, they were holding with grit and calculation. Turner shouted orders, his face red with frustration. Yet for the first time, Doubt flickered in his eyes. The Dawsons weren't crumbling. They were standing, and the showdown had only just begun. Gunfire echoed across the Dawson ranch, the sharp cracks rolling over the prairie like thunder. Dust hung thick in the air, mingling with the acrid sting of powder. Elias kept his rifle steady, every movement measured. Jacob fought with reckless energy, while Samuel clung to discipline, forcing himself to breathe slow as Elias had taught. Turner's men pressed hard, shouting curses, their bullets chewing into fence posts and scattering dirt at the boys' boots. Turner himself remained behind them, barking orders, his face twisted with fury. He had expected fear to break the Dawsons, but instead he found resistance, trained, stubborn, and unyielding. "Hold your ground," Elias commanded, his voice carrying above the chaos. "They want to drive you out. Make them see you won't move." Samuel steadied his rifle against the corral rail, squeezing the trigger with patience. The shot struck a rider's hat clean off, the man jerking back in shock. Laughter rippled through the defenders, and even Jacob grinned fiercely. Turner's scowl deepened. He raised his pistol, firing wildly toward the porch where Clara stood. The bullet splintered wood inches from her cane. She did not flinch. Instead, she lifted her chin, her voice sharp as a whip. "You'll never own this land, Silas Turner." The words carried across the battlefield, stronger than any gunshot. The neighbors who had come to watch from a distance began to stir. They had seen Clara fight fire with her bare hands, seen her stand when others would have fallen. Her defiance struck something deep inside them. One man, Henry Allen, spurred his horse forward. "I'll not stand by while Turner burns us all to feed his pride." He leveled his rifle at one of Turner's men, forcing the outlaw to retreat. Another rancher joined, then another. Soon, the watchers became fighters, their loyalty shifting in the heat of the moment. Turner's men, once confident in their numbers, now found themselves surrounded by the very townsfolk they had expected to cow into silence. Elias saw the shift and seized it. "Now's your moment," he barked to Jacob and Samuel. "Press them back, but don't waste your shots." Jacob rose from cover, his rifle cracking. He hit the ground near Turner's boots, close enough to send the land baron stumbling backward. Samuel advanced carefully, his voice steady as he called out, "You're finished, Turner. Walk away before you've got nothing left." Turner's men faltered. Some dropped their weapons outright, unwilling to stand against neighbors they might share meals with tomorrow. Others pulled back, their loyalty to coin not worth the cost of blood. Turner, red with rage, shouted after them, "Cowards! You'll regret this. I made you. I gave you work." But no one listened. The tide had turned, and Elias knew it. He lowered his rifle slightly, his voice calm but cutting. "Your money bought fear, Turner, but fear's spent now. You've got nothing left to hold them." Turner's pistol shook in his hand, his bravado slipping as his hired men abandoned him one by one. The townsfolk pressed closer, their rifles trained, their faces hard with resolve. Clara stepped forward despite her limp, her cane striking the dirt with authority. "This land isn't yours," she declared. "And neither are the people you thought you owned." The silence that followed was crushing. Turner looked around, realizing he stood nearly alone. His chest heaved, his face pale beneath the dust and sweat. With a final snarl, he holstered his pistol and swung onto his horse. "This isn't over," he spat, his voice breaking under the weight of defeat. "You'll regret crossing me." But his words rang hollow. As he rode off, the ranch stood strong behind Clara, her sons, and the mountain man who had brought discipline to their fight. The battle wasn't just for land anymore. It was for dignity, for unity, for the right to endure. And for the first time, the Dawsons felt the strength of a community rising beside them. The dust of Turner's retreat still hung in the air, settling slowly over the blackened earth of the Dawson ranch. Men and women lingered with rifles in hand, their faces lit not by victory's triumph, but by the weight of what they had chosen. They had stood together, not because of coin or fear, but because something stronger bound them: respect, defiance, hope. Clara leaned on her cane, her body weary, her heart pounding with pride. She looked at Jacob and Samuel, both streaked with soot and sweat, their youth carved into something harder by fire and fight. "Your father left shadows," she said softly, her voice trembling yet clear. "But today you stood in the light. You proved this land is ours, not because of his name, but because of your will." Jacob swallowed hard. His anger burned down into resolve. "We won't stop now, Ma. Turner will come again, but next time we'll be ready." Samuel glanced at Elias, his eyes steady. "Because we're not fighting alone anymore." Elias stood apart at the fence line, his rifle slung across his back, his silhouette etched against the fading sun. He had seen many fights in his years, but this one had been different. Not fought for gold, nor for vengeance, but for something rare, a family's right to endure. When the neighbors began to leave, some paused to clasp Clara's hand, others tipped their hats to the boys. Each gesture was small, but together they carried the weight of a promise. The Dawsons were no longer isolated. They had a community that would stand, if only because one widow and her sons had refused to bow. Later, when the ranch grew quiet, Elias saddled his horse. Clara approached, leaning on her cane, her eyes searching his weathered face. "You've given more than we could ever repay, Elias, but I fear you'll ride off before I've said enough." Elias adjusted the saddle, his voice low. "I've never been one for staying long. Mountains don't let a man rest easy in one place." Jacob stepped forward, his tone firm. "Then stay for us." "We still have more to learn," Samuel added, his voice softer but no less certain. "You're part of this family now, whether you mean to be or not." Elias looked at them both, their faces carrying the fire of youth tempered by struggle. He had once sworn off belonging, convinced solitude was safer than ties that could break. Yet here, on this scarred patch of land, he had found something he hadn't sought, a reason to stand beside others again. He met Clara's eyes, and for the first time in years, his voice carried a hint of something almost tender. "Maybe I'll linger a while longer, long enough to see those boys grow into the men they're meant to be." Clara's smile was weary but genuine. "That's all I could ask." The night deepened, stars spilling across the sky, vast and unyielding. The prairie, though scarred by fire and conflict, breathed with quiet resilience. The Dawsons would rebuild, fences would be mended, cattle driven back, seed laid in blackened earth that would one day green again. Elias sat by the fire with Jacob and Samuel, teaching them not of rifles or rope, but of patience, of listening to the land's rhythm, of knowing when to hold and when to move. The widow watched from the porch, her heart swelling with a pride sharper than sorrow. Turner had left with threats on his tongue, but his power had cracked. He had underestimated what unity could do, and now the valley knew it. The Dawsons were no longer just a family clinging to survival. They had become a symbol of endurance, of standing firm when all odds pressed against them. As the flames flickered, Elias lifted his gaze to the boys. "This fight isn't done, but you've proven one thing. Turner can't take from you what you refuse to give. Remember that and you'll outlast him, same as any storm." The fire crackled, the prairie whispered, and the night wrapped around them like a promise. For the first time in a long while, Elias McGraw felt at peace, not because the battle was won, but because he no longer fought alone. If you followed this tale to its end, make sure to subscribe for more stories of grit and resilience from the Old West. And don't forget, click the next video on your screen to keep riding deeper into these untold frontiers.